is a very important official document, as you can imagine. A dam in Saudi Arabia, Islamic heartland, around 46 years after the passing away of Muhammad. You would like, and by the Caliph, instructed by the Caliph. So you would expect this to have some sort of Islamic tone to itself, wouldn't you? Some reference to Muhammad, some reference to, what you need to do in Islam and all those sorts of things. But the problem is this, as you can see here, there is no reference whatsoever to Muhammad. In relation to Muhammad. And that is where they will stumble by the fact that the earliest of see Arul. Hello JC, how are you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you. This is where you would find the earliest of resources on Muhammad's history comes from about 250 years after Muhammad. Are you with me? 250 years after Muhammad. In other words, the earliest of information that Muslims depend on do not come from qualified sources, and that is precisely going to be my problem today. When I say Muhammad is an people didn't even care about Muhammad, I'll give you a simple example and then you will see what I'm talking about. Okay, so Islam of today, Islam of the 9th century onward gives us a story. But Muhammad doesn't come from the 9th century. Muhammad comes from the 7th century. His year of passing away is AD 632. So Muhammad comes from the 7th century, first half of 7th century. But information on that Islam gives us today come from 9th century or later sources. Hadiths, later sources. Seerahs, later sources. And this is where I'd like to see what the earliest of sources have to say about this person, if at all he existed, this person called Muhammad. And this is where this example is.
So let me talk about this is your obviously now. I mean, if you read the book, The 100 Most Influential People, I'm talking about influential people, successful people, that have so much influence, by Michael Hart, right? Which these are, I think, American, respected authors. Where did it, in fact, establish that to put him as the most successful and influential person in the history of mankind? In terms of theological, secular, political, and so on. I'm just saying.
Hanif, this is the problem. Yeah. Hello, brother. This is the problem. Just because someone has included Muhammad in a book named 100 Influential People doesn't make him a historical reality. Because if someone writing about Muhammad today makes him a historical reality, equally, if someone else today who is also a scholar of some regard claims that Muhammad never existed, and if he writes a book about that, which by the way, those kinds of books do exist from qualified sources today, the problem is, well, what do we do? One person says he is the most influential person, another person says that he never even existed. So the point is, those books do not give us hard facts about history. And that is where my point to you today, my suggestion to you today, Hanif, would be to go to the actual underlying evidence. That's what we care about. Evidence from the earliest of available sources. With me? And that is where, let me read this to you, please. So you understand, according to Islam, today's Islam, or according to Islam that began from 9th century, we are told that Muhammad was followed by various caliphs. And you have initially the Rashidun Caliphate for about 30, just 1 year under 30 years. 29 years after Muhammad ruled by Rashidun Caliphate, expanded and obtained more territory. After Rashidun Caliphate, you have the Umayyad Caliphate, going up to 750 AD. And after Umayyad Caliphate, you have Abbasid Caliphate and so on. This is what we are told. But the problem is, In Umayyad Caliphate, the first caliph is a person called Muawiyah. He is the first caliph in Umayyad Caliphate. So comes after Ali, the fourth of the Rashidun caliphs. And I'm going to read to you. So these, by the way, the references I'm going to provide to you today are from inscriptions. Inscriptions, rock inscriptions, building inscriptions. Like how we have stone inscriptions today. When the queen of course now it's the king. When the king opens a particular thing, or when the king dedicates a ship to the service of the nation, he opens a plaque, opens a stone, commemorative stone. Yeah. Likewise, we have official documents written on stones, which come from the early years. We also have other resources, writings on stones by the general mass, not necessarily the political leaders, but the general mass and so on. But I'm going to read to you first of all, I'm going to read to you a rock inscription which is there to commemorate the opening of a particular dam. And who is the one who does this? Muawiyah, the fifth caliph, the first one in the Umayyad Caliphate. And this is what he says. So this comes from 58 years after Hijrah. So after Hijrah, Muhammad lived for about 12 years. So this comes about, so you have 46 years.
So you now admitting say Muhammad, this was 12 years after Muhammad lived. So you are actually verifying that Muhammad did exist.
No, I'm going to read to you what this says. I'm going to read to you what this says. We'll read this and see what we can reverse engineer in relation to Muhammad. Because I'm going to read, so 58 AH, so about 40 years or 46 years after the time of Muhammad, from Saudi Arabia, yeah, supposed heartland of Islam. And this is what the inscription says. This dam belongs to the servant of God, Muawiyah, the commander of the believers. Abdullah ibn Sakr built it with the permission of God in the year 58. O God, forgive the servant of God, Muawiyah, the commander of the believers, and make him firm and succor him, and grant the believers enjoyment with it, or through him. Yeah, says the Caliph. And then it ends by saying Amr ibn Hubab wrote this. So there's a writer, but there is a guy who leads or triggers the writing, who is the one who built the dam, or on whose instructions the dam was built, and that was Muawiyah himself. And I'm going to point out to you a few details here. Now, so this is a very important official document, as you can imagine. A dam in Saudi Arabia, Islamic heartland, around 46 years after the passing away of Muhammad. You would like, and by the Caliph, instructed by the Caliph. So you would expect this to have some sort of Islamic tone to itself, wouldn't you? Some reference to Muhammad, some reference to, what you need to do in Islam and all those sorts of things. But the problem is this, as you can see here, there is no reference whatsoever to Muhammad. In the entire commemorative writing, no reference to Muhammad. This dam belongs to the servant of God, Muawiyah. There is a reference to Muawiyah himself. And he gives a title for himself, the commander of the believers. But then it goes on to say, Abdullah ibn Sakr built it with the permission of God, gives a year, God, oh God, Allah, oh Allah, this is all Arabic by the way, forgive the servant of God, Muawiyah, the commander of the believers, and make him firm. So, point number one, no reference to Muhammad. The name Muhammad isn't even used, which is sort of an abomination, because if you consider a Muslim today, a faithful Muslim, a sincere Muslim at the park or anywhere else, you can imagine, of course, you grew up in a context of Muslims, you can imagine the number of times they'd be thinking about Muhammad. If that is the case with simple Muslims today, how about caliphs? Can you see what I'm saying? Caliphs are supposed to be his successors. how much would they remember Muhammad? How much would they revere Muhammad? How much would they respect Muhammad? How much would they want to write about Muhammad or mention Muhammad wherever they have a chance to mention him? But an official document, no reference to Muhammad. Problem number one. Problem number two. So this Muawiyah calls himself a servant of God. Muawiyah calls himself a servant of God. And then he gives a particular title to himself. Hanif, the particular title to himself is the commander of the believers. Huge problem again. Huge problem again. You know what the problem is? This is supposed to be a caliph of a caliphate, or caliphate in English. Now, what does the word caliph mean? Do you know what the word caliph means? Exactly, successor to who? Successor to Muhammad, which is a very reputable title, isn't it? So when you say successor to Muhammad, that is the key title anyone could ever get. What did Ali and where the Sunnis and Shias split? What did they fight for? They had different views on who should be the caliph, because that's the top post. To be called the caliph is the top recognition, isn't it?
Caliph of who? Caliph of who? The Shia Sunni.
Yeah, but
Shia. What were they fighting for?
No. Shia Sunni later. I just use that to mention to you the importance of a caliph, the office of caliph. But the problem is, this is before the time of Shia Sunni split. Before the time of that. So here the problem is, you have the Shias and Sunnis split decisively with the second fitna, the second civil war, Islamic civil war. This is before the time of the second civil war. Okay, so here we are not talking about Shia Sunni split. There was a bit of rumbling in the Islamic community, but we'll come to that. Yes, I'll come to that in a bit later, please. But here the point is this: caliph is the top recognition that this person could have ever got. In comparison to referring to himself as caliph, to call him the commander of the believers is an inferior title. But guess what he does? He refers to himself as the commander of the believers, and that's all. Commander of the believers, and that's all. Which is a bit surprising, from understanding 9th century Islam. But it isn't surprising given the fact that he has already ignored the name Muhammad. He has ignored the person of Muhammad, and therefore no wonder he ignores the idea that he is the follower or successor of that Muhammad. Do you see what I'm saying? Two problems. Third problem.
So where did this come from?
This comes from Saudi Arabia. This comes from Saudi Arabia, and this particular inscription. It's about a dam inscription by Muawiyah. You can find the particular details of this inscription even in Islamic sources. There's a website called Islamic Awareness. Now they don't critically analyze. They blindly make people think just because they show something, Muslims should be happy and say, oh wow, we do history also. Because they don't critically analyze, they haven't commented these things there. But it's available there also. In other words, the comments are from me, comments are from other people, but the actual inscription is not subjective, it's an objective resource. Yeah. So problem number two, he just calls himself the commander of the believers, not as successor to Muhammad. Problem number one, ignored Muhammad. Problem number two, called him just as the commander of the army of the believers. Problem number three, you know about the Islamic calendar.
Yeah, vaguely.
Vaguely, I mean, of course you at least know the fact that there is an Islamic calendar. Yeah. For with the Christian calendar, we use the terms Anno Domini, before Christ. Yeah. With the Christian calendar, the attempt is that we consider the birth of Jesus Christ as the 0 point. Anytime before that is before Christ, anytime after that is Anno Domini, after the year of the Lord. So that's our reference point. In Islam, the reference point is what is called the Hijrah. Not Muhammad's birth year, it's the supposed Muhammad's birth year, not the supposed Muhammad's year of death, but rather the supposed Muhammad's Hijrah. You know what the Hijrah is, Mecca to Medina and so on. So that is the reference point. For instance, when you talk about Islamic resources, you actually need to, in this case, for example, the scholar who has written this article isn't even a Muslim, but when he writes about Islamic resources that are connected with Islam or connected to the Middle East, the Islamic heartland, he uses the reference of Islamic year, a Hijrah, after Hijrah, 58 after Hijrah. Can you see that? But the problem is this. You see the number, you know where the number comes from? The number actually comes from, in many cases, the numbers, I have many inscriptions here. In many cases, the numbers actually come from the inscriptions themselves. The numbers come from the inscriptions themselves. Can you see? In the year 58. Yeah, in the year 58. And that is what the scholars pick up on. And he has quoted the fact that this inscription seems to date from 58 AH. Yeah, but here is the problem. The scholar today calls it 58 AH. But what did the inscription call itself as? It just says year 58. It has no reference to what is called the Hijrah. It says year 58. You know what? The only other context that it provides. The only other context that it provides with an Islamic tone is this title called the title called the Commander of the Believers, where the word the believers seems to be used time and time again. The word believers seems to be used time and time again. If you knew Arabic, al-mu'minin, believers. So the reference point used is what is called year of the jurisdiction of the believers. No reference to Hijrah. Could you imagine a Muslim walking around?
What is it? Okay, before going too much into your technical stuff, obviously you can drag on. So what's your overall...
So my overall comment based on that one inscription, my overall conclusion based on that one inscription is Islam of today, Islam of 9th century and later tell us a story about Muhammad, of this person called Muhammad, of this religion called Islam and so on. It tells us that there are various religious texts, various religious practices and so on. But go to the earliest of resources, because these 9th century and later resources are late in comparison to the supposed Muhammad himself. But if you go to the earliest of resources, what you find is the earliest of resources do not record a person called Muhammad. It could be for one of two reasons. Number one, could be maybe it didn't exist in the particular way he is seen today. Or alternatively, even if there was a person called Muhammad, he was irrelevant to their jurisdiction. He was irrelevant to how they were trying to reach out to God during the time of Muawiyah, if you see what I mean. So clearly Muawiyah says, clearly Muawiyah has some sort of a prayer. This belongs to the servant of God, and he says, built it with the permission of God. So some sort of reference to God, but with no reference to Muhammad. In other words, the earliest of evidence that we find contradicts the later supposed history that is being told to us. And in other words,
without knowing too much about history, just as a common sense, is that if you get two historians, you coming from a certain school, right, with all the evidence, I'm just saying, for argument's sake, there could be someone from the Muslim side who could have a different history.
And that is where Hanif.
See what I mean?
Hanif.
I mean, I don't know that side or your side too much, but I'm just saying.
This is one of the problems, Hanif, and I'm going to actually give you sort of homework in this regard, please. The problem is this. Most Muslims you see today here, most Muslims, if I were to engage with them with this, they'll actually give an answer, like if they are sensible, if they are reasonable, the answer would be something similar to what you're saying in different kinds of
yeah,
statements.
yeah.
Something like, oh, I don't know enough to actually make a comment, but someone else might have a better comment. That sort of stuff.
From historical background.
But here is the problem. You see what Islam has done to you? Islam has convinced all these Muslims, or at least you, might not be as or as zealous as some of the others are, but the zealous ones would have a similar answer to you, which means Islam has raised up zealots with ignorance of history. How can you have a zealot? I am a zealot for Jesus Christ. Through God's grace, I'd like to give up my life for Jesus Christ. Even though I have a family, I have a kid and so on, I am willing to. Why? Because I understand my Lord Jesus Christ has done tremendous things for me. Not just for me, but also for my family, also for my friends, also for the entire world. His love for for people like you is tremendous. So in that context, I'm willing to even lay down my life. I'm a zealot for the Lord Jesus Christ. But why?
You could have equally the same people who would lay their life for the Prophet.
Exactly the point. My point is, my zeal comes from a knowledge of Jesus Christ and knowledge of the history of Jesus Christ. I am willing to do what I am willing to do because I am convicted and convinced based on my analysis and my research that this Jesus is historically true. The love that I hear from, the love of Jesus that I hear from various people and various resources is actually true. Now, in contrast, you have zealots walking around. But what is the difference between me and them? Their zeal is not based on research on history. Their zeal is based on ignorance. Most of these people, I challenge you, Hanif, most of these people would have no rebuttal to what I'm talking about here because they would have no knowledge. They would have a storyline like what you were trying to say earlier because they've been taught. Muhammad was here, he did these things and so on. But have they done the research? You would find seldom any of the Muslims here to have done those things. And that is where, Hanif, the challenge goes back to this. One second, Hanif. This is very important, Hanif. You as an intelligent man is very qualified. You don't have to depend on some religious fanatics and so on. Not that they are more qualified than you. You might be very intelligent man and so on. My point, and that this is where I earlier said I'll give you sort of a homework. My homework to you, or my challenge to you is, okay, they may say all sorts of things, but you, when you get home, or even before you leave, maybe take a picture of this. You can read this for yourself. Yeah? You can read this inscription. You can cross-verify. Go on the internet. Like I said, this resource is available even on Islamic sites. You can cross-verify and say, well, is this inscription a historical inscription? Or did Arul just bring up some random printed stuff and claim that it was a historical inscription? You can cross-verify that, number one. And once you seem to be very convinced anyway. Yeah, once you have cross-verified that this actually comes from that period, from Muawiyah, then you read this for yourself. Because you have been taught what Islam is in your life. And you have been taught how many times you need to keep Muhammad the center of your life. What he did is what you should do. How he washed his hand, how he prayed, what he did before certain things is how you do what you do. Yeah, he is the sunnah for you. He is the example. And so you can ask the question, if I am so Muhammad-centric in my life, if I am so, Hanif, if I am supposed to imitate Muhammad so much in my life, you ask the question, how come Muawiyah did not do that? You can ask that question because you are an intelligent man.
They might say Muawiyah was crazy.
Well, exactly the point. The problem is, no. Well,
that's saying, for argument's sake.
Hanif, that's exactly my point. My point is, to people of today's Islam, early resources would be inconsistent with what they think is true. And this would be crazy. But the challenge is, this is the first resource on Muhammad. Not these people's ideas. Not the ideas of...
You can find this from Saudi Arabia, you're saying?
Yes, this is from Saudi Arabia. This is from 58AH. I have a reference. You can take a reference if you want. And you can check it online for yourself. So this is just one example. I can show you evidence after artifact after artifact after artifact. You find the same pattern until well later in time. You do not find a focus on Muhammad. He doesn't even show up in what is supposed to be even official Islamic documents. He doesn't even show up. And therefore,
your argument, your belief is that he didn't exist from your evidence.
no, I am not even going to say whether he existed or not. My point is going to be, regardless of whether he existed or not, to who people see today as successors of this guy, Muhammad, to them, he was irrelevant when they were doing significant things. Do you see what I'm saying? Muawiyah, these guys think Muawiyah is a successor. But Muawiyah thinks, well, I am just the commander of the believers. Who am I succeeding? You know what I mean? I'm not going to even talk about Muhammad. So did he exist? To what extent did he exist? I mean, who was the true historic Muhammad, if at all there was a historical Muhammad? We don't know. I don't know. I don't have resources on that. When I don't have resources to justify, I have a view on Muhammad, by the way.
I haven't read any books like you have on history for either Muhammad or Jesus, right? But I have come across, on the internet and maybe media, you can find books, articles that say, did Jesus ever exist? I haven't read into it,
Yeah.
but you can come across.
Absolutely.
Did he ever
Now,
exist?
Christians, this is the challenge, Hanif. This is the challenge. Believe it or not, Christians, right through their history, have been very, and according to the Bible doesn't encourage us to have a blind belief. If you want to believe Jesus Christ, no one is going to come after you and kill you. No one is going to ostracize you and so on. We're not forced to do what we're doing. We're not forced to even...
Not in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, I think they had apostasy.
Well, there are... No, Hanif, it's not as simple as that. I'd like to... the Old Testament, most people that I know of, I've come across, don't have the appropriate grounding to come to conclusions like that. So they make, I would call what you've just said as a flippant point, not as a rooted point. Because most of them don't know the details, the underlying, the structural details of the Old Testament. And so when they make a comment about the Old Testament, it's really only cosmetic, superficial. So I would leave that aside. At least if you understand Jesus Christ, if you understand the New Testament, I'm assuming you would appreciate the idea. We are not forced to believe in anything. We have the free choice. We need to be convinced. And so...
I think that's everyone has got intelligence.
Everyone is
convinced. They need to be convinced. Every person who accepts something, they need to be convinced.
They need to be,
Convinced, yeah.
and a true God would appreciate that,
Yeah.
but Islam doesn't allow that. In Islam,
Well,
apostasy...
I know vaguely. They also say there's no compulsion in religion.
Well, they can say all sorts of things. But Hanif, you and I know the frank reality.
Off the camera, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem.
I just-
Okay, you can stand there, no problem.